This morning, we're going to continue on in our series of discipleship and how we build God's family. How we do that. My name's Gina. I'm part of the teaching team, and I'm really excited to just take this. This might be a little bit more of a practical look at building disciples and how that works. We're going to continue on in our stories that we started a few weeks ago. But before we go any further, Cambria, I'm going to throw you off just a bit. And I'm wondering if you could put up my second to the last slide. On that slide, we have a definition of what a disciple is. And I think that's really important to have that solidified as we go forward so we're all speaking the same language. So a disciple is someone who knows and follows Jesus. Their head has made that decision. This disciple is someone who's being changed by Jesus, so their heart's being transformed by Jesus in their life. And a disciple is someone who is committed to the mission of Jesus. So their head has made a decision, their heart's coming along, and their hands are now doing the work of Jesus. That's what a disciple is. And a disciple will naturally produce more disciples. If you're a parent, this is very easy because you have your disciples under your roof. Super easy, piece of cake. No. Yeah, it's not easy. But if you're a parent, your kids are going to be your primary place of discipleship. So I want to just say that now for some of you. I can remember being in a season of my life where our kids were young, and the thought of like joining along, like one-on-one, like Chris was talking about for discipleship, that terrified me because I remember as a young mom thinking, there is no way I'm going to have time to do anything else other than not have my children die. You know, like keeping them alive was the biggest thing. And that's good because they were my first disciples. And then as your kids grow, obviously your season changes. So please, young parents with babies at home, don't hear this and feel like this is another thing to do. Your children are your primary place of discipleship. Someday they'll grow up and hopefully move on in their lives, and you'll have more room. Until then, that's your field of discipleship. So, but this is that was our definition so that we all know where we're going with discipleship. Jeremy talked about a couple weeks ago from the story in Genesis chapter 29 of how not to build a family, how not to build God's family. And he told us the story of Jacob and how he went to get a bride and ended up with 4 brides and so much strife and struggle because he did it his way, not God's way. And last week, Pastor Chuck introduced us, he left us hanging on the story of Isaac and Rebekah and the servant who went on behalf of Abraham, Isaac's father, to fetch a bride for Isaac. And we're going to finish and continue on in that story looking at the servant, but we're going to go a little farther. But before we do, I want to share with you this dream I had the other night. It was Friday night. I had this dream. And you know you have those dreams that are so vivid, you wake up and you're like, whoa, and they stay with you throughout the day. Like even today, it just feels so real. So this is the dream I had, that my family, all 5 of us, I have 3 kids and Zach, my husband, we had decided to become foster parents in this dream. And so my kids were very excited about this. They were like, we'll give up our bedrooms. They were just like moving the whole house around, getting ready for the arrival of this baby. We knew we were going to have this baby that we were going to be a foster parents for. And the day came for us to go collect this baby. And we were so excited. And I remember coming into wherever we were, and there was somebody handing this infant, little baby boy, into my arms. And my family's all around me, and we're all just weeping. Every single one of us, all 5 of us in my dream, were weeping. Just weeping. And I picked up this baby, and I held it close, like you do, and weeping and feeling such relief. All of us, and my whole family was surrounding, we were all just around this baby. And in the dream, I remember just such a strong emotion of relief and joy. And finally, like, oh, he's safe now. He's in a place where he's safe. He's home. We'll take care of him. We'll nurture him. We'll raise him up. And we're just like, I can't even, I'll stop because I'm going to cry. It just was the feeling of such relief. Like, thank God he's home. Thank God he's okay. And then I woke up. And I laid in bed and thought, wow, okay, God speaks in dreams. What exactly are you saying? Is this literal? Is it time to rearrange the house and, do that? We've thought about it. Well, I don't know. I've thought about it. What is this all about? And I haven't really processed the whole thing, but I do know this. As I was praying through it yesterday, God said to me, what you felt, those emotions in that dream, was just a tiny sliver of how I feel when one of my kids comes home. That relief, that joy, that feeling of, oh, finally, they're okay. Finally, they're in a place where they're going to be loved, nurtured, and raised, and protected.
That's good.
And I thought, man, that's just a tiny sliver. I mean, I'm weeping. I woke up crying from this dream. Such a strong emotion. And God feels that and even more when his kids come home to him because he loves us. And as Christ followers, we have the tremendous opportunity of providing a safe home for his kids. And that's discipleship, is making a place where his kids can be safe and loved and nurtured and grow. That's discipleship. And for us, in that dream, it came out of a place of love. We just wanted to love this baby because we just love this baby. We didn't even know this baby, it was just, I don't even know, it was just a baby. But we loved him. I know it was a him. But there was so much love. That's what discipleship has to start from, is that place of deep love. And it flows out of there. Today we're going to finish our story that Chuck started last week in Genesis chapter 24. And it's the story of Isaac and Rebekah. When it was time for him to get married, and he needed to find a bride. And I'll just summarize here. Abraham, Isaac's father, did not want Isaac to marry a woman from where they were living. He wanted Isaac to find a bride from their home country, so he sends his servant off on this journey to find the bride. And the servant's very trusted. We learned that he's got all of the marks of a great disciple, that he's trusted and he's faithful and he's available. And he goes off to this foreign land. He loads 10 camels and on whatever else you take for that kind of a journey. And he goes to Mesopotamia. And he arrives at the city, comes outside the city where the well is, where everybody got water. And he has his camels lie down, and it's a long journey. And so he prays this real specific prayer there. He says, God, he wants to make sure he gets the right girl. This is a lot at stake here. So he prays this prayer. He says, God, give me success today. Show me love. Show love to my master Abraham. And I'm standing here at the well, and the daughters of the city are coming out. It was a time for them to come get water at the end of the day. That was a customary thing for them to do. And so he says, let the young woman to whom I ask for a drink, let her water my camels. She'll say, I'll water your camels, and I'll know. That's the prayer. I'm going to ask someone for a drink, and if she's the one, she's going to offer to water my camels as well. It's a real specific prayer that totally depends on God doing what God does. So he's there, and before he had even finished speaking, is what it says in verse 15. I love that it says speaking. It gives me the thought that this servant was in a continual dialogue with God. He's not just, this wasn't his first time, right? So before he'd even finished talking to God about this, he lifts up, and here she comes, Rebekah. And it says a few things about Rebekah, that she's beautiful, she's lovely to look at, she is a virgin, she hasn't been married, she's single, she has got she's in the right season of life to become a bride. Could be the one. So she comes out, and he asks, can I get a drink of water? So she goes down, draws from the well, gives the servant the water, and then she says, let me water your camels too. So let me just insert fun factoid here. 10 camels came with the servant on this long journey. And I had to look this up because I was curious. I think of, we're going to the well or we're going to get water. I go out to the hose in the backyard, turn it on, hit the nozzle, and I've got water for days, right? That's what we think of. But this is a well that's deep that she would have to come out with a jug of water, like a 5-gallon jug. We went camping, so we use is that a 5-gallon, cooler that holds our water while we're camping? Something along that size. A camel going on a long journey, when they're done and ready to replenish, one camel can drink about 40 gallons of water in a few minutes, really. So one camel, 40 gallons of water. Servant had 10 camels. So we've got 400 gallons of water. A gallon of water weighs roughly 8 pounds. So that means our sweet Rebecca, she was very strong. She's got over 3,000 pounds of water that she fetched and watered these camels with. That was Rebecca. I don't think physically, I can't even imagine the strength. And it's not like she just turned the tap on and sprayed a hose at him. She was putting her jug down, filling it up, dumping it, down and dumping it. At least 40 trips, probably more. She probably spilled some on the way, I don't know. So this woman, Rebecca, was strong. She was available. She was willing to work hard. And as she's watering the camels, the servant is watching her. I'm going to put this down here. The servant's watching her to see, is she the one? I get the sense that he's continually still talking to God about this. It says he watched her to see. He gazed at her in silence. She finishes watering the camels, however long that took, and he asks her for some information. Whose daughter are you? Is there room in your house? Things like that. She begins to say who she is, and the servant realizes that she is actually, if I figured out this right, that she's the daughter of Abraham's nephew, is what I think I figured out. I might be wrong. You can correct me on that as I look through the family lines. But she's kin. She's relatives. In our time, that seems weird that it would be like a distant cousin. But that was what they wanted then. That was normal and that was good. So the servant's probably getting pretty excited. This could be the one. God's answering my prayer. So they go back to her house. The family comes out to meet him. He tells a story, and he gives her these gold bracelets and earrings and all of these gifts that he comes with. And they make a meal. And the servant says, before we eat, I got to get this off my chest. I've got a mission. This is a big proposition that he's arriving with. I know we just met. You don't know where I'm from, but I'd like to take your daughter away so she can be the bride of my master's son. Cool? How's that sound? It's a big question, right? I would not just be sure, off you go, Caden. Good luck. Probably won't ever see you again. That would not be, that's a big ask, right? So they have their meal, or they don't even have their meal. He asks the question, can this be? But throughout this, what I love is that we see this evidence of this servant who says, the God who my master serves, my God, the Lord has blessed us and he's prospered us. He gives credit to God all throughout. And even he worships the Lord when he realizes who Rebecca is. His response is worship. He's just so connected with God. He gives his proposition. They all agree. Yeah, let's do this. This is from the Lord, because how could it not be that you prayed such a specific prayer that she would water the camels too, and she did, and there's room for you overnight. So they agree to that. He stays the night because it's later in the day. And in the morning, the servant wakes up and he says, okay, let's get Rebecca, pack up, let's go. And her brother and her mother, they're like, well, maybe she could just stay 10 more days. Can we just hang on? And the servant's like, no, the Lord's given me favor. He's prospered me. Let's go. And so they say, let's ask Rebecca. Rebecca, will you go? And she says, yeah, I will go. And off they go. So I love this because when it comes to discipleship, we all have different roles in discipleship. We have our part. The servant had his part. He had his specific prayer. God, if you want this person, make it clear. So then God had his part. He had to be working behind the scenes with Rebecca to motivate her to water 10 camels. That is God. And then there was Rebecca's part to say, yeah, I'm willing to go. When we're making disciples and connecting with people in discipleship relationships, we can't forget that. We have to be willing, we have to be looking to identify people that God wants us in connection with, but we have to be trusting that God's working in their hearts as well. And then they get a choice to say, yes, I want to be in this like mentoring discipleship. I want to walk closer to Jesus together kind of relationship. God has his part, we have our part, disciples have their parts. So they go, and Rebecca, they arrive to where Isaac is, and she sees him in the distance and says who's that guy? And the servant says, that's your new husband. And so she covers herself with the veil, because that was customary, and gets off her camel, and Isaac sees her, and must have been a pretty nice veil, because they got married right there, and they were married. And it says that he was comforted after his mother's death. His mother had died. He was sad. He got a new wife. And, it's just this beautiful story of how the servant followed God's plan in building this family. And that's how we have to be about building God's family, is that we got to be in tune with God like the servant was. We can just tell this wasn't his first conversation, that he probably had a habit of connecting with God. But the servant also prays this really specific identifying prayer. He's totally trusting God in this. Any number of women gathering water could have said, yeah, I'll give you water. Maybe a few others would have said, yeah, I'll water your camels. But Rebecca was the first one to say it. We don't know. I don't know. The scripture doesn't tell us this, but I wonder how many other women were out there gathering water. And had he asked others for a drink? I don't know. We don't get that picture. Maybe he did. But she was the one. So this real specific identifying prayer, like, who do you want me to connect with? That's what discipleship is. The servant had this relationship with God that I think was really close. There was love and there was adoration. Verse 27 shows us that, where he says, blessed be the Lord. He bows and worships before the Lord. He's got this connection already. So building God's family really must start with love and connection with God. That intimacy is what builds families. I want to follow this story a little bit further into chapter 25. After Isaac and Rebecca get married, Rebecca can't have children. And this little snippet shows us just how we build God's family. So it says in verse 25, or chapter 25, verse 21, then Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife, because she was barren. She couldn't have children. So Isaac prays to God for her, and then God grants his prayer, and she becomes pregnant. It's just this tiny little thing, right? But what this shows me is that Isaac was close with God too, just like the servant. When Rebecca finds him back in chapter 24, she found him meditating in the field. He was out there meditating and praying, connecting with God. Isaac was a man, much like his father's servant, probably much like his father, who was in tune with God and close with God. And out of that love and intimate place, growth happens. Isaac was a man of prayer, and I believe that this is a key to building God's family, is that we have to be built and surrounded, like really grounded in God's love, but we also have to be people of prayer. See, physical intimacy will lead to physical reproduction. It's the birds and the bees, right? But spiritual intimacy will lead to spiritual reproduction. When we're close with God, reproduction in others naturally follows. It's just a natural byproduct, just like it is in a physical relationship with a man and a woman. It's one follows the other. I love this story because it really shows us this clear way to build God's family. And it's such a contrast with the story that we saw a couple weeks ago with Jacob. And we see it in chapter 29 of Genesis, that Jacob set out to build a family, but he set out to do it not depending on God. He didn't pray God-centered prayers. He set out to do it relying on his own strength. And if you remember, he goes out to find a bride. He's running from his brother he had strife with. He was afraid his brother was going to kill him. He goes and he sees Rachel coming and immediately resorts to feats of strength to, impress her. They were supposed to roll the stone away so they could water the sheep. And so he's like, well, don't wait for everybody else. I'll roll the stone away. He relies on his strength and his own way to build his family. And it works. He ends up getting married to Leah, not his first choice for a bride, but then he gets Leah's sister Rachel, who was his first choice. But then also in the mix, he gets both of their servants. So poor guy gets 4 brides and a lot of strife and struggle because of that, because he set out to do it his own way. They all, are all together, and Leah, the one who wasn't chosen, is not his first choice. She is the one who starts having babies. She's just always pregnant. Rachel, the chosen one, is not having babies. And so she says to Jacob, give me children. She says, give me children or I will die. It becomes this competition. Who can have the most babies? Who can please Jacob the most by producing the most things? And I think often we do that with God. It becomes this works-based thing. If I do enough things, if I come to church enough, if I come and bring enough people to church, if I share the gospel this amount of times, if I do all of these things, then God will have favor with me. Then God will love me. That's what the women were doing, trying to earn the love of their husband by producing children. And it makes me wonder, what's our motivation in all of this for discipleship? We talk about discipleship, it's what we should be doing as a church. We should be reproducing, we should be sharing and helping people grow closer to God, but what's our motivation? See, with Isaac and Rebekah, they had a family based on love. It was just this natural thing, this natural connection. Prayer naturally came out of that, and their family grew. But Jacob and all of his women had lots of children, but it was all based on competition and fighting and a dissatisfaction, not being enough. If I have another baby, then he's going to love me. I know it. And we do that with God sometimes. We just work for it. But that's not the way to build God's family. See, this is why we have to start from a place of love. Understanding God loves us no matter what we do or what we don't do. And if we don't start with that as our foundation, everything else is just going to go off on the wrong path. I, a long time ago, did this embroidery project, and it was the United States. So, it was stitching the states, and it was just a fun little thing to do. But so I set out to do it, and I had my pattern, and I had my fabric, and I had all of the things, and I started stitching, and it's kind of like cross-stitching if you've ever done that. There's lots of counting the squares to try to figure out where I go. And I started in California stitching, got through the Pacific coast, I think I got to about Texas, and things started to feel a little weird. I looked at it and thought, I don't know if that state truly looks like that. My borders were a little off. But my thought was, well, it's not off too much, right? So I kept stitching, and by the time I got to Michigan, so I'm working east, I realized Michigan ended up being, Michigan's a weird shape anyway, being totally the wrong shape. And the states underneath it that should have been this big were this big. But then the next one was this big, even though it should have been this big. I was totally off on my stitching because somewhere back in California, I took a wrong turn. I just maybe went one square off. And what was a tiny mistake back in California completely ruined my project by the time I got to Michigan. There was no recovery from it. I actually threw it away and started again. My point is, if we start with the wrong thing, we end up in the wrong place. And if we're not doing anything out of love for God, we're going to end up in the wrong place.
That's right.
We just are.
Yeah.
We have to start with an understanding of how much God loves us, no matter what. If you never, ever, ever lead someone to saving knowledge in Jesus, God still loves you. It's okay. It is. If you feel so much pressure like discipleship and being part of a life group and this is killing me, I don't want to do this, that's okay. You still should. But God loves you even if you don't. This is not about earning God's favor. Let's get bigger let's get bigger numbers in our church and get more people. Let's get bigger because God will love us more. That's putting the cart before the horse. We do this because we're responding to God's love first.
That's right.
That's the whole thing. And out of that, all the growth happens. We got to be grounded in God's love, and then we got to start with God-centered prayer. And that comes from being connected with God. Like that servant prayed that real specific identifying prayer. We're going to talk just a minute about some specifics of that what that God-centered prayer looks like, but we have to, I love the story of the servant, just that God-centered prayer that comes from a place of intimacy. You know, God had to answer that when the servant prayed. I'd find it for you. There it is. When the servant prayed, "Let the young woman to whom I say, 'Let down your jar that I may drink,' and the one who says, 'Drink, and I'll water your camels,' let her be the one. By this I'll know that you've shown love to my master." It's a real specific God-centered prayer. It's not based on ego, like what he does at all. It's totally based on God. So here are some ways, some practical ways. You know, once we're grounded in God's love, we got to just be people of prayer. So here's some practical ways to grow and to practice God-centered prayer. I have 4 of them. And the first one is ask God his opinion. I just love this. This has nothing to do with discipleship, but it has everything to do with being close to God and being connected with God. Is asking God his opinion. Zach and I just celebrated 19 years of marriage. And so, thank you. We've known each other for 21 years. So we have 21 years behind us of asking each other our opinions. What did you think of that movie? What did you think of that food? What did you think about all the things? We've had all those years of developing connection, and we really know each other now well because we have been asking opinions. We ask questions of one another, and I think we should do this of God. You know, go see a movie, and as you walk out, think to yourself, I really liked this part. God, what was your favorite part of that movie? I mean, why not ask God that? Listen. You might be surprised what you hear back. We were camping last week, and I loved the campground we stayed at because it was on a lake, and Zach and I discovered accidentally, we took the paddle boards out to the middle of the lake, and then we looked up and went, we were right by Mount Hood. And if you got to this right spot in the lake, you could look, and the mountain was just right there with the trees coming down and the hills. It was like you couldn't set it up better for a painting or a picture, just perfectly composed. And so I'd paddle out as often as I could because it was beautiful. I loved to just sit and look at the mountain. But at one point in the camping trip, I was by myself at the campsite, and I was spending some time with the Lord, and I asked him, I was saying to the Lord, I love this place. I want to stay here forever. And I just love it. And I thought, well, I wonder what God thinks. What do you like about this place? I asked him. And this is what I really believe he said to me. He said, you know when you go out to the middle of the lake and you can look and see Mount Hood? I said, yeah, I like that. He said, that's my favorite part. And this is why. I love this. This is what he said. The reason that's my favorite part is because I set that up just perfect because I knew that people would like it. I knew that somebody would see it and it would make them think of me. And as an artist, I paint sometimes. I love it when I create a painting that somebody likes to look at. It just, not because I have to feed my ego, but because there's something joy-filled about sharing that with someone else. It just makes me happy. Like, that made you happy? That makes me happy that it made you happy. And I think it's that way with God. And he shared that with me. Like, that's one way now I'm closer to God, because I have that little tidbit, that information about him that I didn't have before. It's because I asked him for his opinion. So that's one way to practice and to grow in prayer. The second thing is just to listen to God. Oh, no, wait, that's not the second thing. The second thing is to become a person who prays for others. We can't just pray about ourselves or give God our list, but to really pray for others. And that seems kind of vague and non-specific. And I always struggle with, like, here's my prayer list. How do I handle praying for all of the needs? So I don't do this, but I read about someone who does this, and I think it's a good idea. So he wrote down his prayer list, and he numbered it. And he happened to have 31 names or groups on his prayer list. And so that kind of lines up with the days in a month, roughly. So he decided that every day he would just pray for that one person. And rather than just praying for them generally, he decided to connect with that person if he could. He would send him a text, give him a call, email, some way, and saying, hey, today's the day I'm praying for you today, all day. How can I pray for you? And two things happened. One is the people he was praying for were really blessed because he took the time to do that. But he started to see God move because he was praying real specific prayers. Because instead it wasn't just this general, oh, bless this person. It was a specific thing. This person needs help with their rent or whatever. So that's a practice. And when you really do that, it might take 10 minutes of your day. But at the end of the month, you've got 30 people that you've prayed for and brought to God about. That's a pretty cool thing. So that's another way, is to become a person to pray who prays for others. The third way is that we listen to God. Listen. Because prayer is not just talking to God or at God. It really should be talking with God. Yeah. So that means we have to spend more time tuning in than we do broadcasting. Radios are constantly broadcasting. You can always tune into some kind of signal. And I think we have a tendency, I know I have a tendency, I do a lot more broadcasting than I do receiving. But if we're going to become people who pray God-centered prayers, we need to use both of our ears a lot more than we use one mouth. And listen. Listen to what God says. Maybe this is something I do. I walk to work when it's working time and during the school season. And I pray as I walk, and I often pray for the people that people I know along the route. And so much of it is I pray and I feel like God will say something. Like I give myself time just to listen. How can we help this person? And God will give me an idea. How can I interact? How can I handle this situation? And then I'm quiet. I listen. We have to listen. Otherwise, it's just too much talking. And those kind of prayers become self-focused prayers, I think. At least they do for me, if I'm talking more than I'm listening. And then the final thing, like the servant, we need to pray identifying prayers. Now, those are really bold and really specific. So the servant prayed this real specific identifying prayer to know who the woman was going to be, who's going to be the wife. It was real specific. And so what we can do as we grow in discipleship, what is this clear indicator? How can I know that you want me to disciple this person? If this person happens to be a child in your home, you don't need to pray that prayer. That's your disciple. But maybe it's somebody at school, somebody in your class, like that God has given you a friendship with, that you can share about Jesus with. Maybe it's that person because you realize that you both like Legos, I don't know, or you both love the same books, or you both end up at the same gym all the time, at the same time, every day. Like maybe that God's saying something through that circumstance. Maybe your prayer could be, I feel like maybe I should reach out to this person and maybe have some sort of a relationship where we're discipling. But God, if that's what you want, have them come to me first. That's pretty specific, right? And it lets God do his part. It lets them do their part because they have to come and ask. Those are real specific ways to pray. And it's those prayers, again, they're based in love for God first. That is what begins a disciple-making movement in our church, in our community. And remember, the point of this is not just to get people in the doors. The point of this is to bring all the kids home. Just how we welcomed that little baby in my dream. He was home, and he was safe, and everything was going to be okay. That's what this is all about, is becoming home, welcoming home God's kids. That's what discipleship really is. We can't do that if we don't talk to God. And we can't do that if we don't even love God or understand his love for us. We have to start with that. It's simple, but it's not easy. But like Isaac and Rebekah found, it grew their family. And it grew it right with love and peace. And you can read through. I'm going to, let's see if you've got homework. I'd give you homework this week, is to read through Genesis 24, and then look at Genesis 29 and contrast the two. Extra credit if you read 24 through 29, okay? Gold stars. But read through those and pay attention. Look at how Jacob worked and struggled and was just striving hard on his own effort to build his family. And then look at how Isaac and Rebekah prayed. They were in tune with God. That's where it has to come from. So that's homework step number 1. Just read through that. Homework step number 2, ask God's opinion about something this week. Anything, I don't care, something. Maybe about a meal you had, maybe about a conversation with somebody. One thing, ask and listen. You might be so surprised how he answers you. That's number 2. And then number 3, maybe you might be struggling with understanding the love of God in your life. And maybe that's just really hard to comprehend. How could he really love me as fully as you say he does? I don't understand. So my challenge to you, if you're in that place, is to read 1 John chapter 4. There's more things you could read. That was just what the Lord brought me to this week, because it talks about God's love for us. You read that. Ask God to show you how he loves you. Pray an identifying prayer about that. God, if you really do love me like they say you do, show me. He will, if you're looking for it, because he wants us to know his love. He really does. So that's your homework. That's our mission as a church, too, to walk in his love and to share that. It's going to be a natural growth thing. God, thank you that you do love us so much more than we can understand. And God, I thank you for giving me that dream as just a picture of how you feel when we come to you. Oh, you're so relieved. You're so glad. And then you surround us with people to keep us safe and nurtured and grow. I love that. I just love that. And we love you today. God, I pray as we go this week, help us to get a bigger picture, a better picture of how you love us that's not based in any other idea except what your word says. How your word tells us that you love us. That's the foundation for all things. And for those here who struggle with that, God, I pray that you would bring softening and understanding and a love in response to your love. That is so good. Lord, we love you, and we thank you for showing us how to build your family. And thank you for showing us how not to do it, so we can learn from that as well. I pray you just walk with us this week. Amen.